So you're a teacher and you've been asked to conduct a disciplinary investigation into some student behaviour. Maybe we're talking about bullying, violence, drug and alcohol abuse. Well, one of the most important tasks that you have to carry out is the interviewing of all the students involved. But here's the problem. Without being specifically trained in how to conduct an investigative interview, there's a lot that can go wrong. It's actually very difficult to obtain accurate and reliable information from students in an interview. And without accurate and reliable information, you are potentially making decisions that will have serious consequences for both the students and for yourself based on unreliable information. Now in this video, I'm going to point out 3 common mistakes that are made when people are conducting investigative interviews and give you a way to avoid those mistakes so you can get your interviews right. I'm a former detective sergeant with a background in education. I specialise in investigative interviewing, and I now help educators like you conduct investigations that are effective, efficient, and ethically and legally compliant. Let's go. Mistake number 1, going into an interview with a list of questions. Now, this is very common, especially if you haven't been trained. It's common to head into an interview with a list of specific questions that you want to ask the student. But here's the thing. Your goal in an interview is to encourage a free flow of information and to try and avoid contaminating the information that comes from the student, to try and avoid contaminating their memory. Now, a list of questions actually discourages a free flow of information because you just end up reading the questions off the list. You go into the interview closed-minded, and this limits the amount of information you're able to obtain from the student because you've actually limited the amount of information you're asking their brain to retrieve. The human brain is lazy. So when you go into an interview and just ask a list of questions, what information do you think you're going to get back? All you're going to get back is the information answering those questions that you've asked and nothing more. Now, there are some other issues as well heading into an interview with a list of pre-prepared questions. It can look as though, it can give the impression that you'll bring with you a set of presuppositions to the investigative process. And this can open you up to allegations of bias from the students and from their families as well. So what can you do instead? Well, here's a different way of framing it. I'm not saying to throw out your list of questions, but here's what you can do with them instead. You can reframe those questions into a list of topics. And then what you do is you guide the student through those topics. And as they speak to you in response to your prompts and open questions, you then feed off the information that they are giving you. So think of it more as a managed conversation rather than an interview, or in some cases an interrogation. That's the subject of another video for another time. But you're responding to the information that the student gives you and using that information to formulate the next question that you're going to ask, rather than just working your way through the list of questions. Can you see the difference? Now, one of the side effects or one of the consequences of working your way through a list of topics rather than a list of written questions is that the student will sometimes head off topic. They'll go down a rabbit hole, so to speak. And that's okay to a certain extent, because what can often happen is they'll end up talking for a while and then they'll circle back and you'll end up uncovering details that you never would have uncovered before. So you'll end up uncovering, for instance, certain actions that the student might have seen that they hadn't remembered at the start, or words or phrases, little details that can be very important when you come to make your factual findings during your investigation. You might uncover motivations that sit behind certain behaviours, or you might uncover contextual background information that can be really important later on to whoever's making the decisions about disciplinary measures. So I know that if you're not trained in how to conduct investigative interviews, it can be very easy to rely on having a list of questions when you go into your interview to make it feel safe, but just try to avoid that and try to reframe them as topics and then guide the student through the topics instead. Mistake number 2, imposing time limits. Now, I get it. I used to be a teacher myself. I know what it's like. You're all under pressure. You're really busy, and often these disciplinary issues or the incidents that require some form of investigation, they don't happen when you're sitting around waiting for something to do. They happen at the end of a busy lunch break, just before your next lesson, or the end of the day when the child's parent is there to pick them up, and you're left with a little time period, a short period of time to try and conduct your investigation. Even so, try to avoid placing time limits on the interview. So I know what normally happens is you might have, say, a 10-minute window to try and gather all the information together. And so you'll sit down and you'll say to the student, right, we've got 10 minutes before your next class. I just want to ask you a few questions about what happened. Try to avoid that. Here's why. Putting a time limit on, again, encourages the student to start leaving bits of information out. If they know they've only got a certain amount of time to give you information, they're just going to give you the littlest piece of information they can to get the process over and done with so they can get on to the next event in their lives. And if you've told them that there's only a certain period of time, then they're certainly not going to give you all the information that you actually need to establish the facts about what has happened. It means that you're not getting a full account from the student. It means that you're missing out details. And how can you establish the truth about what's happened if you don't actually get all the information? So let's say you've got a student, we'll call him Simon, and he's come in, you've got 20 minutes to conduct the interview. You might simply sit him down and say, Simon, thank you so much for coming and talking to me. As you know, there was a bit of an incident at lunchtime, and it's my job to try and work out exactly what happened. And I understand you might have seen or heard what went on. Now, I know that you've got a class coming up soon. That's okay for now. Just put that aside, and I'll take care of that. Don't stress about that. You've got as much time as you want, because it's really important for me to get the details about exactly what's happened. Okay, Simon, everything you say to me is important, and I want you to have as much time as possible. Now, chances are Simon is not going to talk to you for 2 hours. He's just not going to. In fact, he's probably only going to talk to you for 10 or 15 minutes. It probably will be done within that 20-minute time period. But the sheer fact that you've told him that there is no time limit will free up his brain, will put his brain at ease, and enable him to give you a full and free account that you can actually trust as being accurate and reliable. So try to avoid putting a time limit on the interview itself. Mistake number 3, interrupting. Now this is a big one. And it's one of the biggest problems even for experienced investigators like me. You ask a question, the interviewee starts talking, and then you straight away talk over the top of them. You interrupt them, you don't let them finish, or they finish, they pause, and you straight away jump in with your next question. That's an absolute killer if you are asking for accurate and reliable information. Now, it's natural to interrupt. I understand why you do it. I do it too. I think there are 3 reasons why we do it. One is because it's something that we just do naturally in our natural conversations with each other. When you're talking to your friends or your family, you don't allow big silences in the conversation because that just feels awkward. If you don't believe me, record the next conversation that you have at home and listen back to it and see how many times people talk over each other. The other thing is that we want to keep the students speaking about what we think is relevant. And so when they start to move off track, and this comes back to what I just talked about before, when they start to go off track, we want to redirect them, right? We want to bring them back to the stuff that we think is relevant. And so we interrupt them. The third reason, again, relates to what I've just talked about. We want to keep the interview short. We want to keep it brief. We're busy. We've got places to go, people to see, things to do, marketing to get done. We've got a next class to go to. We just want to get on with it. And so that's the other reason why we interrupt our students when we're interviewing them. But once you have an understanding of how memory works and how the recall process works, you'll understand that interrupting someone when they're trying to remember something and give you an account of an event that's just happened is a really good way of corrupting their memory. And in some cases, it actually pushes them into fabricating stuff that was never there, to making up details. At the very least, it's certainly going to mean they cut things out of their account. Important details that could be the difference between you establishing the truth or getting an account that's actually somewhat inaccurate. It can also give the impression that you're not actually willing to listen to the student, that you're not actually giving them the opportunity to be heard, which is one of the foundational principles of natural justice or due process, which should really underpin all our disciplinary investigation processes. And so this can lead to allegations, complaints, challenges about your investigation process. People can accuse you of being biased or discriminatory in your investigation processes if you're not allowing students to actually speak. It also means we don't just give the perception that we're not listening, we're actually not listening, because we're already thinking about what's the next question I'm going to ask, what's the next comment I'm going to make. Instead, if you're actually just focusing on allowing them as much time as they need to speak, then that frees you up to be actively listening for details before starting to formulate your next question. Now, if you're a teacher, you know this, because when you're teaching in class, you wouldn't stand up the front of the class, ask them a question, give them 2 seconds, and then ask them another question. Or worse, you wouldn't ask a question and then when a student starts answering it, talk straight over the top of them. And yet if you reflect on the investigative interviews that you do, I think you'll find that you probably do this from time to time. You interrupt. Now, if you found this useful, like and subscribe. There's going to be more videos to come. If you've got questions, additional questions that have come up during this video or about investigations in general, drop them in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. If you'd like some formal training for you and your staff in how to conduct investigations that will actually withstand scrutiny, that ensure you're getting fair outcomes for your students and avoid complaints and grievances from families or legal challenges, go to my website, basaltsolutions.com. We offer workshops both online or in person. If you're a teacher, keep up the good work. What you do is really important. I know what it's like. It's a tough job. I used to do it myself. Keep up the excellent work. You're doing a fantastic job educating the next generation, and I'll see you next time.